basically, we're at the home of Stephan Riess on Sulfur Mountain Road, and Steve is going to talk to us a little while here about his early experiences in water and how he first got interested in it, and some of the experiences he had to indicate that perhaps there were other sources of water than most people currently think of.
Proved to me that I was about 14 years old, between 1912 and 1914 in Switzerland, where I went to school. My parents were living there, and a neighbor home close by, down the street, was the home of Dr. Birkenbach.
Birkenbach?
Yeah, professor of chemistry, who was a nature lover, you might call it. Whenever he had a weekend to spare, 3-4 days, he used to get the bedrolls together, and the two boys of his, one of them a year younger and the other 2 years older than I, went with him on a trip. Mostly down the River Moselle, or the River Rhine, or the River Danube, or the River Neckar, on which the old castles were built, especially on the Rhine, where the major castles there, the huge ones like Remagen and such places, that were built by Charlemagne. And the record on Remagen there says that they begin to level the hilltop off impenetrable mountain peaks.
Solid rock.
All solid granites. That they leveled them off then, and after that they drilled a hole which they called a brunnen, which is a well. And that well went down, in this particular case, around 300 meters, which is roughly 900 feet. But the river below was still more than 1,000 feet lower than the bottom of that well.
Okay.
The elevation.
Right.
And the River Rhine, you know, is a constant flowing stream, and the water, if that was water from in-seep,
Be a little hard to percolate out.
it would have had to go and drain off into the Rhine.
Yeah.
It was the reverse. The water rose to within about 40 feet from the surface of the hole. See? And the funny part of it is, 900 years later, when I saw it first, it was still there, unusable.
The water level was still at that level.
And still usable good water. Well, the reason they built those castles in those days, when he was so-called the ruler of all of the countries, that was his military power.
Sure.
He had usually 200 to 300 cavalry people, horses, and their women and children, and they had chicken and hogs and milk cows, and of course a large amount of beans, lentils.
Thanks, Selma.
Lentils stored, such type of food, you know, wheat, which they then could grind up and start using. So we used to visit those castles to camp a night or two, bedroll stuff, and he used to tell us that he is so disgusted with the teaching of science that he's quit for that reason, you know. And he explained to us that the idea of water, that also had been questioned already way back by Galileo and others, and way back by Pliny in the year 17 AD, the water does not originate in the atmosphere and up and high. It couldn't. There is no oxygen, no atmosphere, no nothing. And the water could not remain there or be such. That all the water on this planet is a product of the interior. he also had been then convinced, and was maybe one of the first one talking about the water destruction by photosynthesis, which means the growing of plant life and forests and trees, whatever green. And without that, there could be no life on the planet. Impossible. And the amount now that has been estimated the last 5 years or more, the last reports that came out after a 40-year study by European and American scientific organizations and universities, the report is that we are losing 600 million gallons of water daily by photosynthesis, or there would be no plant life.
Just in the breakdown of the hydrogen and oxygen.
Naturally.
You don't talk as much.
The oxygen is liberated. Like we inhale it, the plant exhales what we inhale.
Right.
I mean what we exhale.
Right.
And we
inhale what it exhales.
what it produces, which
Right.
is the oxygen.
Right.
So consequently, that volume of water, such enormous amount of water, is the equivalent of every gallon of water would have been consumed in less than 3 million years. There'd be no water in the ocean. However, since tertiary, the oceans have risen 1/3 of our total capacity, which we are also sure of, and it's still rising. So consequently, it's logic in many other respects, in mineralogy, crystallography, that water can only come from the earth itself, not from outer space. And this is actually a water planet. There's no question about that. The latest informations are startling. The Russians now have drilled for almost 12 years constantly and have managed to reach 40,000 feet at this time. Have you read about
Yes,
the
I
deal?
did.
Well,
Scientific
I got the
American.
last report yesterday of, and some. They have now found out that they are drilling at 400-degree temperature on the bottom.
And incredible pressures.
Yeah, but water, not steam, at 400 degrees. In other words, they have no atmosphere, so the water can't steam. See? And then they had about 500, 600 feet above it, or 1,000 feet higher up. They had 20 degrees temperature there, and plenty of water, not freezing, when it should have been frozen.
Right.
Now they're in 400 degrees, and it's water and not steam. They also have found out that they couldn't get any more rock samples from the drilling.
It's because of the temperature.
No, they blow apart into dust before they came
sure.
up.
Because of the decreased pressure as it
Yeah.
goes up.
So there are so many points that they're beginning to learn, and it's a good thing the Russians are doing that. The whole world will benefit greatly from it. 3 or 4 top men from our country were over there and were permitted to see the whole works and observe everything. So we have been a bunch of fools, or taken for a bunch of fools, by believing that humbug that they've been preaching and are preaching right now in the university
About the water cycle.
about water, the origin of water, and what it is. It's ridiculous. That Professor Birkenbach told me and his 2 boys that they are absolutely nuts. It's all humbug. He saw through it. See? And I remember at that time, the first time, I must have been about 14, 15 years old, when I read the report from Pliny, 17 AD. And he wrote it out.
Yeah.
Then Galileo came along, and the Pope told him to reverse it, or else they could burn him on the stake.
Right.
And then, so anyhow,
So Pliny was writing about this way back in
in the year 17 AD, way back, isn't it?
Yes.
Okay. He assumed that it is such and such, but he did mention that they come out of the fire of the interior. The waters are the result from the fires in the interior.
He said the results of the fire. Okay, so as in other words, as a magnet
Yeah,
cools and crystallizes.
steaming the water out of the by heat from the rocks.
Yeah.
Of course, now we know that there were no rocks at that depth. Couldn't exist.
It'd be in a molten state.
Muddy, no solid.
Right.
In the third zone to the interior 5,000 miles across, cannot be anything but gas. We're aware of that. No solid matter. When you take rock today and you get up to 5,000, you have no more left. The gas out. It splits, separates. And the second zone, before we get to the interior zone, we have 7,000 degrees temperature. Just like the Russians are now running in 400 degrees already.
Right. And they're at 40,000 feet.
And the rule is 80 foot deeper, one more degree. Every 80 feet you gain 1 degree. It don't matter whether you're on the North Pole, you're here, or in the tropics. It's from the pressure. So, the funny part of it is that all that fallacy existed for 5,000, 6,000 years now. The concept. But the earliest civilizations followed a stream, a creek, a spring. And some of the springs are known for the last 4,000 and 5,000 years. You take the spring in Syria, what's the name, the capital there?
Damascus.
Damascus. 1.5 million population and water surplus. Whereas the rest of the country is totally dry.
That spring. Chris wrote about in his book, I guess.
You what?
Chris wrote about.
Yeah,
that
he
spring
mentioned
book.
it too. But there are so many others. You take the 2 big springs in America. Outside of 92 springs, I have the records on them, in the Sierras. California, Washington, and on up in Canada. They all go over 200 gallons a minute. Many of them 5 and 7 and 9,000 gallons a minute. And I was all there all winter long, Stephen. If you go up to Mammoth now, on the way to Reno, you cross Hot Creek.
Right.
This time of year, you see the steam coming off.
Through the snow, right.
5,000 gallons a minute. Out of Lake Volcanic up here. No inflow possible. None at all. What about our, Lake Tahoe? The same damn story.
Right. It's
Huh?
in a big rift valley in through it.
Well, you got the Truckee River and you got the other river coming down there, going into what, going, what the heck is the name there?
Humboldt.
No, the Humboldt comes in too from the north. But these rivers that come out of Tahoe, the Truckee River and the other one,
I don't know what the other name of the Truckee is.
Baker or something, I don't know. And there's a hell of a lot of water flow. In 2 months, the lake be empty if there was no inflow. You see?
But see, that's something that, I don't know, what did geologists say about that? I mean, how did they explain that?
Ignore it completely. Absolutely. And this is the amazing thing, that they are such a bunch of ignoramuses, or hypocrites rather, that they ignore it when they see it. We got a spring in Oregon, West Oregon, in the desert, that flows the Daly River. Comes out of the ground and on she goes. It's the Daly River. 800 million gallons a day. Enough for a city like Los Angeles. We got one in Missouri, about the same. I don't know which one has a few gallons more or less, constant flow. And Western Oregon certainly doesn't get the rainfall. There is a report now made that if the water, or every drop of water that falls on the state of Oregon, wouldn't supply that spring's flow a year.
Yeah, that's amazing.
So it's an amazing situation that literature, scientific literature, schools, teaching, can overlook all those facts. Because none of them has the guts to admit it and supposed to explain it. What you going to explain? Huh? So nobody ever did. And I've been running into that constantly all my life long. However, I did know that in mines, in deeper mines, they hit enormous streams of water. You must realize that water is an incompressible compound. It just doesn't compress. If it comes to high pressure testing or proving, you use a lot of water. You can't compress it. You can compress a cubic foot of iron somewhat under high pressure, but not water. So if I have 1,000,000 cubic feet of water flowing a day, which many of the big springs do, I would have a tremendous cavity underground where it locked in water, what they call trapped water. And I have repeatedly been told, like in the Simi wells, the state of California, from the governor's office down, kept on insisting that I only have trapped water which one morning will quit. Finished. And I had 100 geologists for a meeting call me in when I made that various statements in magazines, and they were getting worried. See, I called them just ignoramuses, see. So they challenged me, and I was tickled to death to go. And I told him, look here, have you ever recognized the difference between usable, good water, highly mineralized water, or even conate water, brine? And you have the best information by thousands of oil wells you've been drilling. It's always conate water. And do you realize that if you had so many millions of gallons of water in an old prehistoric cavity, empty area, and you pump that water out, that whole damn surface would go down. What would hold this thing up? I pumped 1 billion gallons in Simi. And I said, you realize that is the equivalent of the range, cubic line.
Of the whole...
The horses on a mountain would have collapsed. How could it hang in the air? That a rock can only stand so much and then she breaks. See? Furthermore, water that is locked up, you can take today the absolutely distilled water, lock it up for 10 to 15 years in a cement enclosure. It'll eat through the cement.
And leach the minerals
The
out.
natural law of water is life, absolutely. It's always alive. It never stops disintegrating. That's why we have every metal, every mineral that we know, every substance on this planet in solution in the ocean. That's the only reason. Because water will dissolve it. When you realize how the waters in the past prehistoric channels have taken those enormous caves underground, you know, for miles and miles, great big underground openings.
Realizing...
So I knew as a youngster, from the time I was with that professor on the weekend trips, that he had something that didn't check with what we were told or thought to be, and it always stuck with me.
Right.
And I know that that water in those castle wells could not have been surface water going into these hard rocks and stop somewhere in there in the hole halfway down to the riverbed. It's just out of the question. Also, I did know that the spring waters usually were different, and he pointed that out to us all the time, that a real spring water was different in analysis from what you found in the river or what you generally found in a spring, or rather in a well. When you get below the zone of oxidization, which varies, depends on the formation you're in, could be a lot of sand and gravel and porous mud, they go way in the hell deep. But on the other hand, if you get into the crevice stuff, it can't go below the zone of oxidization. And when you're below the zone of oxidization, no metal, no mineral could ever appear in your water. Because there is no solution, no dissolving without oxidization.
Right.
Clear. And it's about that reason that I am now going, and have done so for a long time, cement off surface waters I don't want, and go below it and get my good water below that. That never's been one or the same, never been together. It's the deep waters that come up. And if it wasn't for deep waters, as is positively established now, this planet would be bone dry in 3 million years or less. There wouldn't be a gallon in the ocean.
Because of photosynthesis.
Sure, naturally. When you realize many of those trees take 50 gallons a day. Some of those large cottonwoods. That they plant along the canals in Arizona alone. 200 gallons a day.
Yeah.
They don't realize that the trees take more water than they take for their farming. Isn't that interesting?
Yeah.
It's unbelievable. I mean, how we can dream along as stupid as possible. And I would be still stuck today if it hadn't been for the fact that the lowering of the table is dawning on him, and that the contamination and the poisoning of the waters, which are still around. I got a report here, 2,200 wells had to be shut down because of poisoning in the state of California.
This past year, or
This last year, at this time,
at this time altogether?
they had to outlaw them. So,
Yeah, you know, that's information that the public is really not very much aware of either. You know, they sort of shut these things down, one here, one there, and most people aren't even aware of the
well,
problems
now
that-
we have 6 wells down in San Diego. Big wells, good water. When they couldn't find anything wrong with the water analysis, they came up with the idea about radioactive. Well, we had to knock that out. And if Meyer wasn't financed very, very clearly, he'd be out of business long ago. He couldn't find him. And I got now a report from the lawyers that Meyer and Shopey and Owen hired. Because Shopey, Meyer, and Owen are going to take the governor and the legislature of California for fraud. They're
That
going
should be
to
a good one.
Huh?
That should be interesting.
That's going to be
Watch
interesting.
that.
They wrote a 10-page. I'm going to give you a copy.
Yes, I'd like to.
Did
read
I
that.
give you one?
No, but you
I
told me
get you
about
one.
it. I'd like to read it.
In which they always wind up lowering of the water table dependent on rainfall, blah, blah. And that means that the Public Utility Commission, which is a legal authority in the state, would have always command of the water. And they govern your price, they take the source, and they tell you to jump in the lake.
Even though you spent the money drilling.
And it's your well on your land, or wherever it is. So, Meyer, of course, and his lawyers, Shopey and Meyer put up $10,000 for a legal investigation of the laws of the land. I give you a copy. And they always wind up table water. Lowering of the table, lowering of the water.
By table water, you mean groundwater?
Groundwater, yeah, table water. And there is where she winds up. And that is going to knock them out. On the other hand, if we don't do that, we are going to get released. They'll take it over on the basis of ground or table water. You see? Community, public owned, finished. They let us have a few gallons out of the well for the land we have maybe in use. The rest belongs to them, which they clearly say, under the law of the land. But where we have new water, independent of groundwater, which they cannot trace our source, to rain or inflow, river sinking or anything, they're hooked. That was decided in 1918 the first time.
Do they have the briefs on that as far as those original rulings on the courts in like in 1918 and so on?
Oh yeah, they're taking that out.
Yeah.
But that's all out of the literature, however.
Yeah, right.
They turned away with that. They took care of that. The Supreme Court came out at that time against the city of San Diego.
Right. That wasn't that Spreckles?
Spreckles against the U.S. The U.S. Navy came in, and the city of San Diego, then a small little city with 15,000 population, turned around by public rights, or what they call it.
Public domain.
Public domain, condemned their best well. But it happened to be one of the deep-seated wells, which after 9 test wells were drilled around, either dry or wet, different water altogether.
Do you remember, was there any information how they located that original well down there?
No. Just, I suppose it was the winter, I don't know.
Yeah.
Just maybe hit and miss, I
Right.
feel.
Steve, why don't we, let's go back, just for a little continuity, why don't we go back to the, after you had gone on these camping trips back in Germany,
Yeah.
and realized that there are other sources of water, and then you started talking basically about some of the experiences in the mines. Maybe
Well,
talk
I never did swallow the idea of water as it was taught, till I got into mining. Prior to that, in my studies in mineralogy for mining purposes, I began to realize that all the rock, all the metals, all the minerals are derived from the water. This is a water planet. The rock itself, all that, came from the interior in gaseous state.
Well, gaseous would include, well, okay, gaseous, and that would include
Well,
water and
no water came after hydrogen, helium, carbon. And from there it spread into different compositions. Since we know that the atom itself has a life cycle and is undergoing constant transmutations, we are convinced of that now. We also know that the whole damn thing begins 300 miles deep, not 30 miles or 20 miles deep, from the gaseous states. So consequently today, there is no more secret. It's well published in high science. The schools haven't taken it up yet. And I suppose it's much better for those idiots that have been teaching for the last 20 years and came out of school 50 years ago. It's better that they don't get involved in it. You know damn well that the original medicine had some good foundations, but the old-fashioned idea about medicine in your business and the handling of certain diseases didn't make sense.
Right.
You know the same story. So I have a tape out here, I gotta dig it out, which is far more clear, far more thought out than what we are doing now, and I'll get it for you.
Okay, good.
I'll dig it out. I got 100 tapes out there I made 10 years, 15 years, 12 years ago,
Right,
whatever.
right, yeah.
And
To go through some more. Okay. So Steve, now, so with the ideas and the different concepts and theories and so on of different water sources, maybe you can talk a little bit about some of the early experiences when you came here to the United States from Germany, and
All right.
early work in the mines, and what sort of tipped you off as far as seeing
knowing from the old country schooling that all the metals and the minerals we find in the ground have originated out of the water transmutation. Only water could have come in the gaseous state, hydrogen and oxygen, and then helium, and from there carbon and on through. We know that for sure. Then I began to know, and of course I followed the metals and the minerals. And as I was getting samples, rock samples, different metals, different minerals, I found the compositions. One more hydrogen, one less, you know. And I could find out where the alteration and the transmutation of the silicons changed, that I had the different minerals. In other words, lead couldn't deposit in certain rocks. Copper couldn't deposit in other certain rocks.
Based on the
Based on the composition from the beginning. And there I was aware of the fact that we are always in a mineral state, leach. Then when I got in and started drifting tunnels, in a hard rock solid formation, 2,000 and 3,000 feet solid rock over me, all of a sudden I hit a stream of water. Solid rock. No sediment, no gravel, nothing.
And the stream would be like in a
fraction.
pressure, just in a fraction. You'd actually see the water flowing
Right.
through it.
Soon as I get into what is called a shear zone,
Right.
shearing,
Uh-huh.
I had the water.
Flowing water.
Yeah, came to run us out. Many mines, the records show 20, 25,000 gallons right like that, running. Take the Comstock.
They'd set off a charge and get into the fracture
Put in a
area.
blast there, and then the next thing I know, I got the water. In one case, I know where we were drilling the holes for blasting, the water, just the 1-inch steel, shut out like a 1-inch faucet. Solid rock. See? So that'll wake you up.
Yes.
How the hell can that be possible? If it was surface water, that's nuts. But deep water, following the contact zone.
Coming up.
Yeah, and then when you study the mineral deposition, the shear zone, the oxidization points, then you find you're always on a contact. That might have been millions a year past originally. See? Just a new one, a new bedding plane came out. I was then convinced. And then I went and transferred the opinion and the assurance that I had into the mining system where I needed water. And the first one I drilled was in Nevada, out there 40 miles, 20 miles from Boulder there.
Nelson.
Yeah. Dry country, they had to quit all the mining, no water. And then I shoved the hole down 182 feet, 183 feet, and drowned out at the Sandwell Beach. And now they're using it again for mining. In a bone dry country.
Yeah. I've been up there. It's bone dry.
And they don't have to pump it. She's overflow. The pipeline from the Wall Street mine is what you call gravity flow. And they loaded the pipe originally with the water, and then when they open it up, she pulls it. And they're taking 400 gallons a minute for the mine, round the clock.
Now that well was, you dug that as an open well, didn't you?
I had to. I wanted to, first I intended I'd get a drill rig. Then Herbert Hoover Jr. said, Steve, don't do it. If you miss it, then they'll run us both out of town. See? Tell the foreman to sink a shaft down for exploration or mining. Like if you're looking for ore. That's when
And you basically got into one of the fractured areas
well, I knew I had to hit it from the geology I could read.
based on underground geology or
No,
surface
on the
geology?
hillside.
Just by looking and
Yeah.
seeing where the faults came to the surface.
Right, and get the bearings on it. And the dip. Strike and dip.
Right, and you had mineralogy by that time too,
Oh,
I guess, because of the
naturally.
mining operation.
So, that was simple. And when I hit that water, it came in so goddamn, it was bone dry all the way down, till we hit it. And then it ran him out of the hole.
What did Herbert Hoover Jr. think about that?
Oh, he thought I was right, so did his father. He was the first man to encourage me. They paid me for just about 18 months my salary to study all the mines I could find that flooded out in Colorado, in Canada, in California, Arizona,
To study the geology of the mines?
in Mexico, to study, to find a leader. What is the surest way of approach to drill one, or where? See, he saw it. Hooper told me, he said, in the driest goddamn desert in Australia, no water for 200 miles around, we hit mines that flooded us.
So he knew of the concept. And
He
was very
knew
aware
the
of problems.
concept, he understood it. So he said, you go out and collect the information so you got something to go by. Compare them all. And I went to Mexico to those mines that flooded out. Most of the big Mexican mines are flooded, you know. Most of the silver mines there, they're just shut down because of the water. And we had quite a few of them in Colorado, of course, flooded out. The Tombstone in Arizona is a perfect example. They're all flooded. And Five Star spent about $10 million trying to pump them dry, and the more they pumped, the more water they got. It didn't work.
It doesn't seem like that. You'd think they could just sell the water in Arizona. My gosh.
Tombstone is well known for that. That's one of them. Then we had a bunch of them up here. Then, of course, the big one was the Comstock. And they thought all they had to do is drill that tunnel, 9-mile tunnel.
To drain it.
Yeah. They drained it out all right. Then they wanted to follow the ore, and they washed out again. The only trouble was the water was hot and sulfur.
So it wasn't potable water.
No. They couldn't work in it. Too much gas and sulfur. They just quit going down at 2,200 feet.
Steve, what would differentiate then between that kind of hot, sulfurous, non-drinkable water and drinkable water? And how do you know where you're going to hit what?
Whatever the minerals are in the water, in the rock.
In the rock.
See, if they are in the rock, they are in as oxides above. When there was maybe a higher water level to begin with or something. But you can analyze your rock damn well and know damn well you got good water coming up. No question of that. I got a tape that's much more satisfactory. That's been well thought out and step for step. I'll dig it out and you make a copy or two. But we are in business, don't you worry. The pipelines are dry, they listen. See, they watch Maya closely.
I'll bet they do.
But all these boys in the water business from Sacramento down are just baffled.
Well, it's not the first time they've been baffled, Steve. You've
No.
baffled them a few other times.
Well, of course, we knocked them out by drilling on that mountain there on the reservoir.
Yes, it's a little bit disconcerting, I'm sure.
It is very disconcerting.
To them, not to Myers or you, obviously. But
No,
to them.
Myers just realized after he got to talk to me and watched it and he investigated a bunch of wells I had drilled, he said, we are going in business. There's more money in water than there is in land or in farming or in anything. There is a warehouse there that you always have the inventory, and you don't have to go out and buy inventory and sell it. It's always there.
Speaking of just water in general, and thinking about some of the problems that we currently are facing with food supply in various parts of the world, and based on the experience you've had in Israel, in Egypt, and Sudan, and so on, is there any doubt in your mind about the availability and the possibility of developing good water sources, say in places like Ethiopia that are
Well, sure.
in famine?
That's what that Englishman, I didn't tell you that fellow is here from London.
You mentioned him.
Well, he's going to be here in another day or two again to talk to me with a writer. He had with him a writer of what they call in England a scientific journal, like.
Right.
And he wants to get to listen and talk to me about it, and I'm very cautious. All I do is give him a few tapes and discuss it with him here. Because when you talk those things with a writer, he generally gets it fouled up. He doesn't quote it or quotes you right.
Right. He gets part of the facts that
Yeah.
they're out of line or out of order.
And that can hurt. That can hurt. Then somebody with a little understanding of geology or mineralogy said, "Oh, that is what? That's humble." And he harms you instead of good, do you good.
But there's no doubt, as far as you're concerned, that those kind of water sources can be developed.
Well, how the hell? I've drilled dozens of them. Not supposed to exist. Under all the rules and regulations, like they're teaching today, these old timers, couldn't be possible. Oh no, it's impossible. But then you tell them, how about that spring running year-round uniformly? The rainwater's never going to run uphill. No drainage into it. And the biggest springs are 8,000 and 9,000 feet elevation. Whether you go to Bolivia, to wherever you go, or Asia, or the Himalayas, or they're always up on the highest points are the biggest springs, in lakes. And generally above the snow line. I mean, nature has provided us all the facilities to think, but we just refuse to do so, or observe.
And one of the problems, of course, is we have certain ideas about the way things work. And we're
Preconceived preconceived. Let somebody said something at the early stages and everybody fell on it. The most logical.
What do you attribute the, your training was at the Naval Academy
Yeah.
in Germany.
Yeah.
When,
We had a better training. We were given a chance to express ourselves. Question.
All I could find.
Here,
for a while
you-
was those bills from them.
You get dumped.
And I guess I paid them the stuff in the-
learn a certain amount to be able to pass an examination. And
Right,
you
right.
don't agree with everything they say.
And they let you express yourself. And I say it's better whenever we made a mistake and spit it out wrong, everybody laughed at us, and so does why. See? Here we hold it secret if you're wrong. In science. Don't admit it.
Well, obviously you had people back in those days who, that had an extensive knowledge of isotope geology also that are in
Well,
those days more to some
Some of
degree.
our best geologists, like Shoes, and 2 or 3 other top men, the last 100 years came out with my idea, talking about it, expressing their opinion and correctly. And right now with this damn Nobel Prize business, they said that many of them have agreed with them, are agreeing with me, but none of them produced the goods. I'm the only one that drilled them. So, there we are. There is no bigger investment today than the acquisition of the type of water like Myra's at. Because they are not dependent on rainfall or precipitation.
Yeah, to be able to prove that will be, to be able to scientifically show and document that as a separate source from the groundwater is
Well,
going to be very beneficial.
Any of those wells that he bored now, the 6 of them, the analysis of the water proves it. The tritium test alone does. There is no possibility of any deep-seated water having tritium content. See? And you don't find any surface waters that hasn't. Because the northern lights, the heavy lightning, are creating the energy, 50 million volts, to create the tritium, hooking 3 atoms together. That was Dr. Lipp's accomplishment.
The water gets into the hydrological cycle, then
Right.
determines it.
There's no way of missing it. But you cannot find it in the interior of the earth.
Could you tell me again, you had described to me once before about the fact that rock,
Yeah.
minerals, let's call it any of the rock formations are basically ash. You
Yeah.
might call it in terms of ash compared to what it was at one time. It was
From a
basically
fluid to ash,
fluid to ash, and basically the
then a
water.
crystallization.
And the crystallization is the
Slow,
process.
slow process.
But as the crystallization occurs, say, let's take it from the magma condition.
All right,
This is cooling. As it cools, you have the rock formation.
Right.
But in the process of the rock formation, you
You're
then
right.
basically have the water.
you get the helium and eventually the carbon.
And, and by that process, then, where would the water come in? As the rock crystallizes.
The
it
water
cools
is the residual,
of the crystallization
Yeah.
process.
or rather the crystallization is secondary, is the residual of the water process itself, from the gaseous hydrogen state.
Yeah, okay.
You start with 1, you go to 2, from 2 you go on the whole ladder.
And then, once you have the water, the hydrogen present, you get the helium and the carbon.
Right, right.
And as soon as oxygen comes along.
And you get solidification. You don't start with any solid matter.
Right. But in the cooling process, then this
Gradually it develops, yeah, that's where the formations come, the atomic rearrangements come in, and the alteration, metamorphosis, and what they call it, transmutation.
The idea of volcanoes producing 98, all of the material that comes in a volcanic eruption being like 98% water, which is pretty well
Sure.
accepted today. Was that a concept that was current when you were in your training in school, or was that?
No, we were told that an enormous amount is water.
But they didn't really have the ability, I guess. to
No, they
analyze.
didn't know the full, but they did know that because of the volcanoes forming the clouds
Right.
50, 100 miles away and the rains,
Yeah. They sort of deducted that.
they deducted that. Volcanoes is the only salvation this planet has to continue. Hope it does, or we'll get stung. That's large production of water is due to volcanoes. Billions and billions of cubic feet. You take that volcano up in Oregon, boy, they have really water production. No matter if the Oregonians get most of it or whoever it gets. Hawaii too. There again, you get right back to the center of the earth. Everything starts with the heat.
Yeah.